It's the Dev Friday Show with Mark and Tim.
So, the way I like to start these conversations is to say, if the roles were reversed and you were interviewing me, what questions would you ask me? Like, if you were looking for a senior developer,
which I'm not.
What qualities would you be looking for, and what questions would you be asking?
Just a soft, velvety beard to look at, Tim. So I'd be like, so what is your process like each morning when you wake up, and you have to gently caress that beard to get it so soft and fluffy, but yet have form.
Right.
Well, so I'd be curious about that. So I'd ask you, like, what is your process?
This is what is amazing about this is it is so revealing to me, these conversations we have. Do you even look at my side of the screen? Because it's not soft or velvety. It's braided right now.
I know. I'm looking at you, but I'm just imagining what your wife feels when she's like,
all right, this is
caressing your cheeks.
This has gotten a bit far. This is we've lost all of the listeners that we didn't have. But no, all right. So we're going to interview you this week. Is that right? Is that what we're doing?
Well, it may not be a good interview, but if we could try, I don't know. We could talk about a few things
if we get to it, because we started that last week.
But there's some topics we could kind of talk about stuff that comes up in an interview, and kind of both technical and also communication. You asked me, like, what do I look for if I was going to interview? It's been a while since I interviewed somebody back in the day. When I was having some director jobs. I was definitely interviewing, looking at resumes. Also, since I've been working in academia, we've been on some hiring committees that had to look at a lot of resumes and talk to people. And so,
but you weren't hiring developers then, were you?
No, just other people,
professors,
administrators. Yeah, that's kind of one of the roles that you get kind of rolled into when you're in academia. You get asked to be on these
when you're
hiring
tenured
committees.
Like you are.
That's right.
Yeah.
But actually, I did it before I was actually tenured too, because like people like me. So, but now I don't get asked anymore. So I don't know. Maybe people don't like me anymore. So I don't know. I've become too controversial.
Wow, we've delved deep in this show already.
Yeah, I know. Well, the one thing I always look for, and I always tell my students, is communication. When you're interviewing somebody, talking with somebody, if you can get a good rapport going, and you feel like the conversation isn't stressful, you not feel like you're pulling information out. Also, one of the things that I did often in interviews, I just asked a lot of questions. Try to get the interviewer to start talking about themselves or talk about the company.
Oh, when you were being interviewed.
Yes. So I would roll back on them.
Okay,
and then that was actually a good process, because people actually liked that, because they saw it was, inquiring and wanted to know more. And always people like to talk about themselves. So it's a good thing to do.
Mark's response is, I don't know. How would you estimate how many gecko owners there are in New York City?
Gecko
or whatever those dumb interview questions that were in vogue. I don't know. I hope they're certainly not anymore, but maybe they are.
Or the most popular manhole cover one.
Right. Yeah. How would you estimate that? I wouldn't, because that's not anything related to what I'm doing. Okay, so you turn the questions right now. When you say communication, do you mean important? It's important for communication in the interview process, or is that your answer for that's a good quality to look for in a senior developer?
I think both, and we kind of started to allude to this at the end of last episode, where we finally start talking about interviewing, even though that was the show topic, where your method of like just kind of talking about technical concepts and terms and saying, how would you work with this, this type of a process, or how, what do you think about this? You're doing that both for testing their technical knowledge, but also seeing how they communicate that. Because if you bring on a developer into a team and if they can't talk to other developers, can't communicate, and they're just very internal, then that's not a very good situation to have. So
no, especially not like a company that's fully remote.
Yeah.
If you need to, it's potentially easier to communicate with people when you're face to face. So if you can't communicate well, and then you have to communicate remotely, that could be difficult. Yeah,
which is it's interesting seeing kids today too, which I do worry about this, especially
kids these days.
I know. It's
Am I right?
I see these kids fresh out of high school, or even some are even in high school and taking college classes too, where you have some who are a little bit more extroverted and comfortable with communication, but then there's a lot of it. Maybe also it's kind of skewed because I teach in the art and design department where we have a lot of art students who are very kind of not extroverts, and so they kind of have a hard time communicating. I always try to encourage them, the sooner you can start to develop that skill of talking, not only about yourself, but about your work, like your process, how do you come up or how do you solve problems? That's what employers look for. You need to be able to communicate that. And if you can't, even if you're like the greatest designer in the world and you make beautiful art and you could do that, but if you can't talk about it, if you can't sell it, then it's maybe, I don't know, maybe if you're an artist, you can kind of sell your stuff like in a gallery and get away with that. But like if you're want to be a professional, like working with other people, you have to be able to communicate that. So that was my primary thing I look for when I would look for applicants and start to talk about them, just see what how the conversations went. And while you're kind of asking them questions, test their knowledge or their opinion about certain things to kind of, see if that kind of falls in line with what you're looking for. But also, you want to hire good people that you feel comfortable with.
Yeah. I mean, that answer of communication is the one that comes up frequently. So that is what is given as an answer a lot. I will say there was one interview I gave where the person basically listed what I was going to do.
Listed what you were going to do.
Right. Like, so I
like your job or?
No, the question was that open-ended. And I'm kind of looking for like that answer of like communication, or what are the strengths that you want to see in a senior developer, those character qualities, like what's important to identify in a senior developer when you're interviewing them. But the question was a little bit more open-ended. It's like, what would you ask me? And the response that I got was basically what I was about to do. It would be like, well, I'd see, how well you understood object-oriented programming, different techniques, see what design patterns you use. And it's like, oh, okay, so that's what we're going to do right here then. Okay. So that was a good answer.
So I'm curious because when people, because you said you start interviewing people for for roles at your company, and so when they get to you, like what kind of rounds have they gone through before, like with HR or other recruiters, or what kind of, when they get to you, what have they already gone through within that process?
They've already talked to somebody who's in a more, say, manager role. Like it's hard to describe that because some things are in flux right now, but it's like that has done more of this. It has been the person that a lot of people have reported to for years now. So they've kind of gone through that and been vetted, and then I'm there to really do the technical interview. They've already done an interview where it's like, oh, we've had a conversation with you. It seems like, your personality is such that you're going to be a decent fit with the company. You're going to be able to work with us. We've made sure that baseline is set. Now we just need to go in and actually say, let's get an idea of are you going to be able to produce good work? Are you going to be able to be productive? How long is it going to take you to get to a productive state? And all that is something that I put in my notes. How long I think it'll take them to get to a point where they're producing, and some comparative, analysis.
And you don't use any like coding problems, like you just talk about, sort of in abstract terms about programming concepts and how they would apply them.
Yeah, right? not coding problems like whiteboard this algorithm, or because I probably couldn't do that. Be honest. Or even the fizz buzz example thing. Just to understand that for loops and what conditionals are. Nothing like that. Towards the end, I will bring up. It's kind of pseudocode. It's real. It's actual PHP code, but it's just some example code where I'll say, take a look at this code and tell me what you would change or what you don't like or what you like. And because what I'm trying to figure out is what are they going to provide to the rest of the team in terms of code review, right? So what are we going to expect from them? And how are they gonna approach those things where they need to tell another developer, oh, I think this could be done better. And I'm also, the specific examples I give, I'm looking for specific call outs that I want them to make, like specific refactor paths that to me indicate, they're senior enough that they see these common anti-patterns and they say, oh, you should be, and it's maybe split something, you should extract that behavior. It doesn't make sense for all this behavior to live in one object, which, I mean, if you want date programming a little bit and go back to the big MVC paradigm, which I think is still around.
I love the MVC. Well, not really,
but anyway,
I grew up on it.
It was, yeah, we could talk about that for a while. We could talk about how web MVC is an actual MVC, and what we're actually doing now is more like MVC.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But the what do we want? We want was it thin controllers, fat models? Is that what people were we would say, which also is probably wrong.
Yeah.
How about we make everything small and testable instead of be like, no, I move my untestable code over there. That was stuff that's related to the database. We can't test that.
Well, step one was getting your database code out of the controller.
Right. But stuff like that,
all the SQL calls should not be done within.
Right, where you'd say, it doesn't make sense. Now, they're not SQL calls in the example code I have, but it is something similar to that, where it's like, that probably shouldn't happen here. It would make more sense for that to be in an external class and be a dependency. That's what I want to hear.
Which is interesting. You think about MVC, and I want you to keep on going with this, but like the MVC, like learning MVC as an educational tool, that was actually pretty valuable because, like I said, it's not the best tool for every job, but then learning the separation of concerns between the model, view, controller was a kind of a value kind of learning process. Because coming back when I started right out of college, I was just doing database programming or doing kind of command line programs on a Unix system. But then when I moved to the web, everything was kind of like in line.
Right.
And so I kind of had this learning MVC kind of got me out of that fact of like, okay, I'm writing these ASP.NET pages or these VB script pages where all the database, the view logic,
it's all right,
the interaction is all kind of in one thing. Maybe you'd have separate out to some files here and there just to kind of make the code a little bit more modular, but everything was kind of in line. And then went to the MVC that kind of started to break that apart. And that was a good learning process for me.
Well, and that's where it's less about MVC itself and more about just separation of concerns.
Yeah.
And no matter what label you give them, as long as you're extracting things and at least putting them in, okay, this is going to stay here, this is going to stay here, this is going to stay here. So we have smaller bits of code that are more understandable. It's just that the whole MVC concept didn't make much sense because your view was server-side rendered, right? Mm-hmm. Your model is a representation from the database, and your controller is really the thing that wrangles the two of those. And when I say it didn't make sense, it's like we extracted that from what was a desktop concept, where, especially if you did actual Visual Basic programming before, it worked. If I recall correctly, it worked really well with this, where you'd bind your data, you'd have a model that described the data that you got from the database, and you would bind that to controls in your view, right? And should that model change, the view would update automatically. That doesn't happen on the web. At least that didn't happen in what we called MVC on the web. Well, you'd send a request and you get a full page refresh back. There was nothing that was tying the model to the view. But in MVC, yes, there's a tie between a model and a view because the control in the view is bound to the data in the model. You update the model, the view updates. So now it's actually very similar to what we see from like a React app, where your model is bound to your view, right? And then the controller is the thing that the view, like interaction then is drives, you bind the view to a controller and you say, when you press this button, execute this or call this method or however it's set up on the controller. And then that controller is responsible for wrangling that action, potentially updating the model. And it's just a cycle. But that's not the web. At least that's not the MVC of 10 years ago. The MVC of 10 years ago is send a request to a controller and then have that controller decipher what's in the request, figure out what you're talking about, maybe pull data back from the database, maybe manipulate it, maybe not, who knows, also find a template, render said template, and send it back down the wire. That's not MVC. That's not MVC at all. Now you have like a controller, which is more of an orchestrator of some kind. You have a request, which is a command, really, of some kind. And then you have your database layer, which you have some type of code that helps you access that, but it's not MVC. I mean, we called it that, but there would have been much better names that would have made a whole lot more sense to call it. But wow,
it's baby steps, Tim.
We've got off.
we as developers, we have to, take baby steps, how we evolve and grow.
Look at you though, just distracting this interview. We're trying to figure out if you're a senior dev here.
Well,
and
if
I'm gonna hire you.
Well, like we talked about, I'm trying to get out of academia and trying to evolve into to the next stage of my old senile life. So
wow.
Yeah, who knows? Well, it's interesting how we ended the last podcast too. You started asking me a bunch of terms and saying, these are things that kind of come up, and you talked about dependency injection, which I was like, my mind went blank, and then I looked it up. I was
some of this we talked about. It's one of those things where
I know what it is, but I can't verbalize. I was like, okay, what? And then I had to actually just look it up and look it up. I was like, oh, back in my C# days, yeah, I did that, but it was like I haven't done that in forever now.
And so that's the discussion that I'm trying to drive when I'm trying to determine, how familiar a developer is with these concepts. You may say oh yeah, I know what dependency injection is, but if you can't articulate it, that tells me you're not quite as senior as what I'm wanting.
And then you asked me about PHP Traits, which I was like, what is this?
Well, I tried to give you we did this after the podcast ended. So
I
tried to give you a head up. Because PHP Traits are similar to Ruby mixins, which you might have been familiar with. PHP Traits are how PHP accomplishes things similar to, but not exactly like, multiple inheritance.
Well, that's what I was getting to. We're thinking about when I looked up PHP Traits on the PHP.net documentation. And
which I will say, I'll make the argument that hands down, PHP.NET's docs are some of the best, if not the best documentation for a computer programming language ever.
It's really, because they also really good. It's like, I like documentation that has more code examples than less text talking about the code. Because most of the documentation, if I could see a good example, then it answers my question of how to use it or what to do. But I do kind of says what traits are mechanisms for code reuse in single inheritance languages PHP. That was something, just that one line made me think, oh, I totally forgot that PHP was a single inheritance language.
Really?
I don't know. Like I said, I've been out of PHP for a little bit. So I was like, but that one line, that got me thinking, okay, now, because when I first looked at the code of traits, I was like, what is this? It doesn't really matter. Why would I ever use this? And then I went back, actually read the text and the definition for it. I was like, oh, okay. Then I kind of get it.
Because you can't, because you can't have multiple inheritance.
Yeah.
So that's so is Python multiple inheritance?
I don't think I ever did. I don't think I did that when I was doing it. I don't know if it is or not.
Okay. C#.
I don't think I actually implement. Oh, C# is, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's more on the compiled than the interpreted. But I don't know why. I want to say that, but then I don't know why that would be true due to the compiled or interpreted nature. But that's probably just because I'm not. I don't write interpreters or compilers. No, he's looking it up right now. See, this is.
I'm curious about it because I never had
this is a dead giveaway in an interview when you hear the click of the keyboard.
This is going to lead into the conversation I'd like to talk about is inheritance versus composition, which you also brought up.
Right. Well, that's one of the questions.
Talking about my experiences with teaching that. But when I was working with Python, I never had an instance where I remember using multiple inheritance Python, but it is, it's available. So I just wanted to just double check that to make sure because it could. But yeah, think about inheritance versus composition, and how does that come up in your conversations when you are interviewing people? Do you find that people have a strong preference towards one or the other?
Yeah, it comes up like this. I say inheritance versus competition. How would you describe the differences? That's how it comes up.
But would you but my what I get to is do you find that people have strong opinions towards one or the other?
Sometimes it throws people for a loop because I don't think they've considered that, which is fine. That might not be something you think about a lot. But I want a senior dev that has thought about it. I want a senior dev that goes, I understand the trade-offs because guess what? Inheritance, especially in a single inheritance language, right? Mm-hmm. Inheritance can have a bunch of problems. It can get really, really. I mean, you have an abstract class that fulfills part of an interface, and then you inherit from that abstract class, and you satisfy the interface, and you say, oh, but I need slightly different behavior, so I'll inherit from my concrete class, and that'll be my parent class, and I'll just change the behavior. But now you have this tree where there's 3 classes where behavior could change that you're not even sure of.
Yeah.
So then when you talk about testing, well, then how do you start testing that? You have a test that applies to the functionality of the abstract class a lot of times. And then you also have a test that, say, applies to the functionality of your concrete instance. But now you've introduced a new parent that inherits from your concrete instance, and you have a test hopefully for your concrete instance. But now what? You need a slightly different test for the change that you made because you've changed the behavior. So you can't apply the same test to both. Or maybe you have now what amounts to an abstract test that you have two concrete implementations of it, one to test your original implementation, one to test the implementation that extends your, it gets really hard. And it gets fragile because changing anything along that inheritance tree may have side effects. So there's definitely issues with inheritance, even though when we start teaching OOP, we're just like, let's talk about inheritance.
Well, that's what I was thinking about when I learned object-oriented programming was through Java.
Right, and you have the animal class, right? Like, and then you have a dog and a cat.
Yeah. So you go. I went from Java to C#. It's pretty much, it's kind of the same thing in a way. But way it treats inheritance, like, when you're learning it, you just learn that that's just the default pattern that you use. And then you may throw in composition into that, how you bring in your other modules or libraries or classes, then you instantiate them within it to build out your class. But then just the inheritance was so strong in there. But then when I went to Python, I kind of got away from it in sense of, like, I realized, like, I don't need to do this. Like, if composition about actually declaring what you want to do within the class without having importing it in, then declaring it, and then or instantiating the objects, and then kind of using it within the class, there is a lot, in a sense. It's when we talk about separation concerns, or kind of separating or modularizing it just feels a little bit better. But when you have to feel like, yes, when you're going to be inheriting these objects, unless you're the one developing the system and you feel like, okay, you have a good grasp of the organization and the structure of the overall application you're doing. So, because I do feel inheritance, when it's done well and you can understand it and what belongs to what, it actually, I like it. But then as a developer going into a system or learning a system, it's so much more work to kind of understand it.
It's hidden behavior.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, this class does this, but then what does the class underneath it do? And I have to then kind of hold both frames in my mind, right? What this does, and then under the hood, what it does. And then if I have more, if you have a bigger tree than that, and this is actually inheriting from this, which is inheriting from something else, there's so much to try to keep in mind. And then, like I said, the test fragility. So when we talk about when we talk about the object-oriented programming example of, you have an animal class and now you have a dog extends it, or that's much better. And I don't know that it's necessarily framed that way. It's much better framed as you have an animal interface, right? And dog implements it.
Yeah.
But then we usually go and then a specific breed of dog and extends, and that's fine, right? The inheritance works for what it works for. But if you use too much of that, you realize that you introduce fragility into your system.
Yeah.
And that's the answer I'm looking for, is that composition says we don't have to worry about a tree, that we keep on building behaviors, because that's when it's misused, when you keep saying, I need a class that does a lot of what this does, but also some of that over there, so let me inherit the thing that already exists and just add more features to it. And then you go, but I need a class that does some of this. It doesn't actually need to do what the first parent does, but it has to do what the child, added to the first parent. So I'm going to then inherit from that, borrow the things that the child introduced, and add my own stuff, and ignore all of the functionality from the original parent class, because that's unrelated. And when you start doing that, you can start saying, wait a second, wouldn't it be better just to create a class that you put a bunch of other classes in?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be better for that child class to not inherit from that parent, but actually have that parent?
Yeah, these are questions that came up when I taught object-oriented programming one semester, and I taught it with Python, which there's an issue about that, whether the department wanted to switch over to Python. Like, these students learned how to program with like C++, but not in an object-oriented way. And then they wanted, and the object-oriented class was either done in the past, either with C++ or Java, and they wanted to use Python. And the reason for that was just to introduce the students to Python. I was like, really? It's like, we have a server-side scripting class. Why don't you? They use PHP for that in a bad way, but why don't you introduce Python and server-side scripting? And they're like, no, we want to use object-oriented. We think object-oriented code. It's like, all right, so you're asking students to learn a completely new language and then learn object-oriented at the same time. And I was like, okay, whatever. It's like I was just wanting to teach a class. I was curious about what the experience was like.
Is this really just like some weird filtering function? unless you really want to be a programmer, you're going to give up.
I know, and I didn't want to start. I eventually wanted to start complaining about the computer science department, but I didn't want to do that yet. But talking about inheritance and inverse composition came up in the class because that's object-oriented programming. Yeah. I found the students, once they got over the hurdle of actually learning the language or learning the syntax, composition made sense to them. But a good number of students with inheritance, they didn't see the purpose for it. They said like, okay, if I could just bring in the classes when I need them,
right? Yeah.
Why do I have to kind of plan out this other class I'm going to inherit, and then I'll implement, the properties and methods within that. So I was like,
did you spend a lot of time going over like function scope and stuff like that? Because
well,
I mean, that's where you may not want something to be part of the public interface, but you may want to, like, that's where inheritance is going to shine.
So then this gets me to the fact of like why I'm not teaching the computer science department anymore, because I start causing waves because we're like, they get to this advanced class. I'm still dealing with like simple issues of like control structures, understanding arrays, very basic stuff that like, coming from their other computer programming class before they get to an object-oriented class, you should already know. And it was like, they're just, I don't know. Like I said, I'm not in that department, even though I taught classes because of the web development courses I teach kind of go back and forth. Their computer science managers take some of my courses and we kind of share students. But it was like I was starting to get more into teaching computer science courses. So that's where I, was also thinking my good 5 to 10 year time frame. I won't be teaching more when I get back into programming. And I just realized, oh my gosh, they're just like, these kids are just not being prepared like the way I would do it. And I'm not in that department, so I have very limited say of changing the program. So I was like, I just told them I'm not teaching those courses anymore because it's too frustrating.
I mean, you're tenured, so you can say whatever you want.
Same thing for mobile development. I was frustrated, even though I love the mobile development course, which is a course that Josh Miller created.
Oh yeah,
he created it.
The
Josh Miller, and if he's ever listened to this, he'll remember this. He created the course, and then he left the college. So he created this course that he didn't even have a chance himself to teach because then he immediately just left the college.
Oh, he didn't even teach it. He created the concept and then left.
Because he helped create the web development program, which pretty much I was kind of in charge of before. Now it's pretty much under the computer science department now, which was a kind of a hybrid program between our design program and computer science, because that's what web development is in a sense. So he helped create that program. And one of the courses in that program was mobile development. So I've taught mobile development for every semester I've been at the school. I've taught it. And like we've had conversations on this, on the podcast about how like that's grown. I've taught with different platforms and both from iOS, Android perspective, React, kind of just trying to make it as cross-platform as possible, as much as possible, and just try to do it the way. But once again, I get frustrated with students coming to that course, and I feel like I had to teach an intro to computer programming course, talk about variables, talk about scoping, talk about control statements,
and that the expectations they've already taken classes that should have covered that, right?
And while also teaching them mobile development and the platforms that we're building upon. And it was like, it just drove me crazy. And I was just, I couldn't do it anymore. So I told them, I'm not teaching mobile development anymore. So, which is a shame. That was one of my,
in a sense, classes anymore. or have you somehow got yourself in a spot where you don't teach anything, but somehow you're still a teacher?
Well, that's what a tenure professor does to you. Once you get tenure, you find ways not to teach.
Is that how it works? Okay.
Yeah.
I am so unfamiliar with this whole concept. So I'm just pulling this stuff in. This is fascinating. So maybe one day I also could not teach.
It's a good life goal.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. But I had a good week. I would have had a busy week because with the students in the course I do teach, my like advanced web class. What other class I teach? It was mostly advanced web, my intro to web class. We're going back to Replit. Students loving it. Like the online Replit editor, and like I've totally switched over getting away from Dreamweaver. I'm happier with it. It's online. I can just log into the students' projects, be able to edit the code with them. It's a real great experience. Highly, highly recommend Replit or a similar editor that kind of provides the type of collaborative experience. And also with Unreal. I was busy this week finishing up the art project that was formerly the claw game.
Oh no, what is it now? If it's not a claw game,
it turned into, well, okay. I was working on the claw game the end of December into January. I had the models working on the rig for the claw, and I was starting to do it. And I was like, I was realizing this is going to take me a good amount of time, because what I have in my mind is like, I want this to be as realistic as possible. Like, I want to be able to control the claw with an interface, and also be able to, when the animation
on your phone, right? Like,
well, on my phone, that was part of it, but also just getting the animation and the movement. I wanted to look just like you were standing in front of a real claw game. That was kind of my idea.
So you want to capture kind of that. The claw moves, and because it moves, it kind of swings a little bit.
Yeah, stuff like that.
You know, like you just try to shift it over, but of course the motor goes more than you want. And it's,
exactly.
And it's swinging all over the place. You're like, this thing is designed to be hard.
I know.
Yeah,
because I was watching a lot of videos of people playing claw games, and I was like, oh my god, this. I was looking. It was the animations was great. And I was like, oh yeah, this works. I want it to look as real as possible. I feel I could do it. And I think it'd be also a great mobile game to have on your phone, because I think the layout, the portrait style layout of a phone would work really great.
Okay,
having this
I can see that.
I'm not saying I just put it on the back burner, because I was like, okay, let me switch it to something a little bit more controversial, because I'm also in the art department. So why don't I create something that maybe people could get a little offended by? So I'm
sorry, I must. I am realizing there's so little about this life that I understand. I didn't realize that the goal of teaching is not to teach. And now art is supposed to be offensive. Is that what I'm learning here?
Well, it doesn't have to be.
I'm just saying, have to be.
I never did anything like that before. I didn't try to push to, as it creates something. You usually, because like I said, I usually come up with a kind of fun, kind of feel good. That's where I kind of want to go. But
because people feel good when they play the claw games.
Yes. Well, yeah, that's a good point. They get a little frustrated, want to beat it down if they can't get the prize. I know. But I was thinking, like, because I've been getting a little frustrated. I've been trying to keep my social media toned down, but like with the war drums beating, and as I get older, the one thing I care about the most is like I become not more of a pacifist, because somebody breaks in my house, I'm going to kill them. But if they for us to go over and invade somebody else, or to encourage a war to be done, I hate that. Just drives me crazy, right? So I'm becoming more of a non what's the word? I don't know. I'm a libertarian, so I just don't want our government to. I don't want our government to go anywhere and do anything. But I thought, okay, why don't I do something about propaganda?
Oh.
Because it's such interesting. Have you ever taken a look at like the propaganda posters and the old films from like between like the 1920s and 1940s, between like World War I, especially in World War II, and how much propaganda our government did during that time to its own population? I mean, to gather up support to
other governments, every government.
And I know every government does propaganda on something, but I was focused on the U.S. because, like I said, I'm kind of like a little bit anti-U.S. right now with what they're doing outside the U.S.
The whole Uncle Sam wants you.
Yes. And so I looked up all these propaganda posters, and I was fascinated. I was like, oh, these are like, number one, they're just funny, but also they're kind of crazy how this was government funded. Right. And how like all this art that was created really to control opinion or minds, or to get people to believe what the government's saying. So that was just fascinating. So I was like, all right, I want to do something around this. I was like, first started, like, why don't I do like a gun range where like if you shoot a target, the target kind of slowly reveals like a propaganda poster. I was like, all right, that may be a little bit kind of too much. I probably should be focused on guns. I was like, all right. So I kind of went away from that, even though I kind of prototyped it. And I thought that was pretty cool, like with the gun range. But I said, okay, why don't I have this?
Bring in the old duck hunt.
Yeah.
Controller.
But then I have.
Do you know how that worked? It's fascinating.
Yeah, the light sensing of.
You're probably the one that told me. Yeah.
No, I don't know if I told you that, but we may have had conversations back in the tech days about this stuff, because I know people are hacking stuff like that, kind of similar things with like with screens and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But so I went out to where the end result was making this up, because the other thing I'm teaching in my interactive design class is architectural visualizations with the Unreal Engine. So having like building like a building, room, designing, some type of interactive features within that. So if you walk up to a sink, be able to kind of turn on the water, or if you walk up to TV, be able to turn it on, and just have some kind of nice, simple interactive features that the students can program with Unreal with its blueprints, which I find is pretty accessible. And
now is the goal, so I know the goal is just to teach them Unreal, but like, is the goal of that concept generally to say, have a realistic render of something that is going to be built? Like, okay, this is what your hotel is going to look like? Or is the goal of that to say we can build virtual spaces for a more metaverse type concept where people are interacting, or is it either?
Well, the second, I have no kind of knowledge about how much, I don't know, because I've never did anything with that before. But yeah, the way I'm teaching is more from an architectural visualization of some prototyping a room or layout that would be used that would then be built out.
Okay, and so that's what better to say. Oh, do you like the kitchen layout this way?
Yes,
and that's when you see it, you're like, no, I don't.
And that's like a big industry or market that Unreal is kind of going in. So, and also just think about from programming side, because I've taught this interactive design course before with multiple platforms. We did Unity, did the Godot engine. This even started off as like an ActionScript course back in the day. Doing like kind of simple games interactions with ActionScript. But what I'm trying to do with the course is make it more accessible with teaching the students how to make kind of interactive elements in a three-dimensional space, but be able to you have to do programming, but to do it in a visual way. So with the blueprints, which actually is this pretty slick system, how Unreal's kind of built that into the editor and how you can make interactions and make your actors, your objects, and make basically define your class definitions in a sense visually with this with the blueprints. So those have been pretty cool. So what I did for the end result, which I was working on this week, spending a lot of late nights kind of finishing up so I could get it installed yesterday, was to make like this room, because the interactive kind of apartment style building. And if you walk in this room, and you can control it with have an Xbox controller, and also have when you go up to the installation, you can put on the headset to hear sounds, and you just walk through the room. But the room, it's a modern apartment, but everything's with nicely framed propaganda posters all around, kind of in different layouts, so that you walk in the room, you're just surrounded by propaganda from the 1940s. So like kind of contrasting like modern, conveniences and living spaces. Then also if you walk to the window, you see a nighttime view of the US Capitol. That's also kind of a cool feature. And then just kind of interacting with the room in different ways. Also, I found some really cool films from the 1940s that I had playing on the TV screens. And then also the spatial audio in Unreal is really cool and really simple to do, where it's like, as you turn your head and move around the room, and let's say there's sound coming from a TV, it'll start moving behind you. It's like super, super cool. It was easy to do. And it was like, it's like brilliant.
Now, have you thought of hooking that up to like an Oculus or something like that?
That would be one step, yeah, because I could test it, because it works right. Just like also think about, I designed it for it was doing on my computer normally, and then my intention was to put it on a 50-inch TV that's mounted in a portrait style. So like you walk up to it, and it'll give you almost like, it's pretty cool if you walk up to it. It gives you like a virtual experience.
Oh, because you're like looking right at it, right?
You're looking right at it. And like you have so much height, you almost see your head can look up and down. So it kind of gives you a nice kind of perspective on that. But I was amazed too, just from the automatic resolution, where like I was designing my computer, I kind of always knew I had to have this portrait style TV. I installed it; it just worked out of the box, because it just automatically with Windows 10. Because Windows 10 you can change like the configuration very easily to be like a portrait style, and you can even flip it if you need to. Just turn the configuration on there, and then Unreal just looks for that and just formats the resolution to it. So it worked great.
Nice. So yeah, so you could like Oculus. Well, you probably. The standalone Oculus, I don't know if you could put the game there, because don't you have to get that from like the Oculus store? I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't done any work with that, so I don't. And I haven't had a real, but that's good. It's a good, interesting thing to think about. Where like, yeah, because I have this kind of prototype experience, and just kind of plug it and see what it would look like. Honestly, I think it would take a little bit of work to making sure that it was just going to run, and I could probably just do a little kind of test or prototyping, just push it up locally on my computer. But I want to, this isn't something, I didn't build this to like release on an app store or anything like that. This is just a one-time installation.
Yeah, like there's the one version of Oculus that you actually plug into your computer.
Yeah, which that's the one I've used. I haven't used the new one, the remote, the Quest. I haven't used that, but
I guess it's the Quest that's just standalone. The processor's in the. But if you could somehow sideload an app into Quest, it seems like it'd be really useful for something like this, because the Quest is only like a couple $100 if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Oh, the other thing was big last week going to this week. I circled up, Tim. I circled up.
You circled up.
I circled up. Can I actually do it here? Let me see. Can I?
I don't even know what this. What in the world? What are you circling up?
Wait,
you made yourself. I
can't even like here.
Oh,
There it is. There.
Oh, yeah. I mean, all the podcast listeners are like, man, I understand what he's saying. No, Mark is a circle.
So yeah, I
That's
circled up, and then
amazing.
here, let me just adjust my standing desk. I can be kind of right in the circle there.
Okay.
Right? So
yeah,
I took
like
your
that.
advice. I
took
got
my
rid
advice?
because I want to get rid of the green screen, because the green screen in my office was just annoying, and my extra lights I have, I was just like, I don't need them. So I'm gonna circle up like Tim, and I did it, and the students like it. So when I start off the class, it's just kind of using my normal kind of room, not having anything behind me, and then when I'm teaching something, I'll switch. And OBS is super simple, and you can just switch to a different scene layout, and then it just switches to the circle. I have a large circle, small circle, left, right side. Got it all, so I can, and also I have shortcut keys assigned on the keyboard. I could switch between them very, very easily, and it's worked well.
Nice. So students like the still being able to see you concept.
Yeah,
right?
and I think also too, like we talked about, it's personalized a little bit more. Where the green screens are great, and I did get it working perfect with my lights. How I can light the green screen up and have a minimal amount of green spillage over to myself, and it's very clear, nice, a nice masking effect or keying effect that I could get, and it's all just having good lighting helps you accomplish that. But it's kind of, it takes you, when you're showing software, I can understand it, but then it kind of takes you out of the your room that you're in. You're putting yourself into a virtual space. I think with classes, and want to try to make it as personal as possible. I think it's been a good move. Also, it's just less hassle for me than having to drag up my green screen and set it up, because I don't like it being behind me when I'm not using it. So
nice.
So what else, Tim?
What I don't know. Am I still interviewing?
Should we start talking about
have
PHP Ugly again, because that's what we
no.
usually end up doing? Which
Is
I did see them last night, which is fine. They were going back and forth between either.
No, we can't.
No,
we need to get other shows to talk about us.
I'm going to get there. I'm going to get there.
About other shows.
I'm getting there. You know me. I have a journey, Tim. I want to tell a story, right? So this is where we go.
Yeah. Okay.
But I was. I picked up on them again on Twitter, like I usually do. They had an interesting conversation about like a database development, and we're just dealing with some database issues, which that always got me thinking about where it didn't. Yeah, I started off as, like I said, a database developer out of college, and kind of migrated then to where I'm at today. And thinking about too, because the one guy, I don't know his name. It's always a guy I don't know his name on the PHP Ugly podcast.
Is that Tom?
Is it Tom? The one I don't know. He's the one vaping all the time. I don't know.
Should be easy enough to identify that.
Okay. Where he was kind of talking about a complicated database issue that he felt like it should be simple to solve, but also something that he was being asked to do that was a little bit out of his domain. And it was a challenge. And the guys were making fun of him, saying like, well, that's what you get paid for, to solve problems, and to learn. If you can't know how to solve it,
they were
learn
making fun of someone on PHP Ugly. This is.
But it got me thinking, right? So like I said, I'm using this content here where, do you ever find yourself where like you, and as a teacher, and where my mind works, I feel too scattered, where the whole balancing out between being a generalist versus specialist, or being a jack of all trades, and being a master of none, always struggling with that. Whereas being in academia, especially in my department, how I have to teach a variety of courses, where even though I'm kind of more design focused, but still I'm using a lot of different things. It almost makes me feel like, okay, I wish I could just focus on one thing for like a good amount of time to become like a really good expert of it. And there were certain times in my life where let's say I was just developing on one platform, or only doing that for, let's say, 6 months to a year. And that was actually kind of pretty good and pretty productive by the end. But then when you're kind of bouncing back and forth between different things that you just have a very kind of cursory knowledge of, it's frustrating. Do you ever find yourself with that? But since you just do PHP, that's why I didn't know if you ever had that experience.
Since you just do PHP. I mean, because PHP doesn't have any type of specializations at all. I mean, not as probably much as what you're saying. But there are plenty of times when it's like, no, there's things that are outside of my normal domain. Specifically, like from a database standpoint, no, I don't do a lot of database. I have libraries that manage most of that. So if you wanted me to say, well, tell me why this SQL query isn't efficient, or I'd have to poke around at it, right? I'd have to poke around. I have to do some research. But I mean, that's the truth. Is there's a lot of things you have to do for research for as a developer. A lot of being a good developer is understanding how to quickly identify the solutions that other people have come up with, and kind of filter them. Because you can't just copy paste from Stack Overflow. You need to copy paste from the right Stack Overflow answers. That's the key.
So do you believe in the full stack developer?
Do I believe in the full stack developer? Are you reading this from like some cue card of things that you think?
No, I'm not. I'm just thinking these off the top of my head when you're talking.
Think people would get upset?
Well, I do have a list of show topics on my org agenda, Tim, and I didn't bring up Emacs, I didn't bring up org, but I have it up on my screen. I'm occasionally looking at it because I'm trying to, keep this moving here.
Because it was so slow. We were running completely out of topics, which is why we had to talk about other podcasts.
So the full stack developer, do you not a believer of that?
You can be a full stack developer for sure, yeah.
But
that's its own specialization.
No, okay, but what is it from your perspective? What is a full stack developer?
From my perspective,
because you say it's
developer.
Well, you say it's its own specialization, and
right.
we're talking about being a general show specialist and kind of what that means.
Right. I mean, full stack developers are people that say that they can handle everything from the design to the implementation of the back end. So it's the full stack. Like if you want a web. And usually, like full stack is only applied in web development, right?
I know.
It's like there's no full stack desktop application developers. They're just like, what now? But it's the idea that
it could be from a mobile development, possibly.
Really though? I mean, how would you split
if
the
you're
stack?
If you're mobile, but your mobile app has a back end, and you have to deal with running the servers or the
you
cloud
could say
hosting,
you're full stack, full stack mobile there because.
But I know traditionally it's meant for web development.
Right, because there's someone who's saying they can do the front end UI and they can do the back end, and that's great. Yeah. But my gut says you're going to be very good at applications that fit well to a full stack mentality. So you're going to be very good at applications that are, say, CRUD style apps. You're going to be using frameworks that accelerate the process of building CRUD style apps.
You probably specialize in one framework too, if you're really
right.
Good
so you're gonna be on Rails, right? Or if you're in the PHP world, you're gonna be no, that's the truth. In the PHP world, you're gonna be on Laravel or something like that.
You've been bringing up Ruby and Rails a lot in this podcast. Are you tempted by that?
Yeah, am I tempted by that?
Yeah.
I think every time I've talked about how ridiculous it is for me to just try to run some command line thing and need gems and everything need to be updated. And I don't know how they could possibly be worse than NPM as an experience for trying to do system level tools, and why somebody would choose that to write a system level tool in.
Because I had.
But you're right. I'm getting pulled right into that ecosystem.
Gemhell's the worst.
But anyway, no, but like if you're using something like Ruby on Rails, you're using something like Laravel. If you're in the PHP world, that makes building a CRUD style app very easy. And if you need to move to something that has complexities in interfacing with other systems, or that is doing something like I work a lot in the telco stuff, doing things with telephony, that's probably going to be out of your wheelhouse. And that's fine. Your specialization, though, you're not a generalist as much as you are as you're specialized in generalism. You know
like
how to do but yeah, the specialization doesn't become I'm back end or I'm front end. The specialization becomes this is the type of application I am tooled and equipped and have the experience to build. And when you come in and you say, well, we need this style application, there's a very complex back end. And has to interact with a bunch of other systems, you may say that's probably something that I'm not as ready to tackle.
So getting back to the hiring process. So if somebody came to you that was forwarded to you from the manager and his tagline or what he was known for, he put that big on his resume saying he's a full stack developer.
Yeah.
Really big, all caps, right on his resume. Would that raise some red flags or questions that you might have to you don't really care? All right.
No, I mean, well, because if a developer is a full stack dev, then there's probably a good spot for him on our team. There's things that will fit well. There's tasks that a full stack developer can say, I can take both the front end and the back end. I can make this work, and that's great. There's also going to be tasks that probably aren't going to at least be something they're naturally able to get to right away based on their experience. They could probably grow into. But there may be questions that you wouldn't necessarily have them solve because their experience isn't on that. I know how to handle some of these less common issues when you're outside of, say, that CRUD style perspective. And you know, and you may want a back end focused developer, or you may say this is completely front end, and there's a whole front end concept that if you're trying to, if your specialty is the whole spectrum, you can't focus on understanding all the nuances of that. That's just what you can't do.
Yeah,
right.
That's what I was trying to get to.
And there's this misconception that full stack means you understand what both a senior, like, I want to say senior, but like what both a front end developer and a back end developer, you're both of them. You're not. You have what level of experience, what information, and I don't mean like on a certain job, but just like there's things we forget how to do, right? Mark, multiple inheritance, and whatever it was.
Do that.
It was composition versus inheritance, or whatever it was that you're like, oh, I haven't done that since
no,
C#.
It was dependency injection. I've done
Dependency
composition
injection,
for
that's right.
inheritance.
Sorry.
I like that.
Sorry, dependency injection.
It's something
like,
I think about it before I go to bed every night.
Is it really? So
Yeah.
that's why you should hire Mark. But stuff like that, it's like, yeah, you lose it when you're not actively using it.
Yeah.
So it's not that a full stack comes along and says, I'm the same as hiring a front end dev and a back end dev. Maybe depending on the experience and the level of a developer that you hire in the senior and the junior, or sorry, the senior and what am I talking about? I'm throwing terms all over the place. In the back end and the front end developer, depending on their level of experience, yes, maybe you'll get a full stack developer that is equivalent of hiring both a front end and a back end. But more than likely, if you're
That's a Rockstar 10. That's what it's called.
Right, they're a ninja.
Or ninja.
They're 10x. They're a 10x developer, which means it's like powdered sugar, but for
Okay,
development.
now if somebody came to you with a resume and they had Ninja or Rockstar on it, would that raise a red flag? Because I'm not only asking for myself.
Only if we sent them to conferences and I had to pay the bill at the end for whatever they did to the hotel.
Eventually, I'll be sending out resumes. So I don't know. I'm tempted.
Ninja and a Rockstar.
Ninja academic.
That's right. Somehow he was a teacher that didn't teach.
I eventually was able to work myself out of teaching.
You try to figure that one out. He got so good at teaching, he didn't do it.
Well, okay. One more thing about teaching, Tim, and one other thing I did this week. I finally watched your full TEDx talk.
Oh, that even made in the show notes. That even made in the show notes last week that we probably never did.
Yeah. Well, well, first of all, there's two issues. You know the big issue with the video, how the first 2 minutes are nothing.
First 2 minutes, there's nothing.
They still haven't fixed. That's crazy.
Were you riveted by those first 2 minutes of absolute nothing?
You did that like 8 years ago or something like that, and they haven't fixed that.
It's long.
I don't know. I was looking at the day. It's like 2014.
Oh, boy,
something like that. Yeah.
Maybe that makes it. Man, I am old. I mean, not as old as Mark, but I am old. Yeah.
That's true.
Just had to throw that one in there. So you watched it.
I watched the whole thing, and now I understand.
All 8 minutes of it.
Okay, because when I think I watched it before, yes, I watched like the first. Okay, after the first blank 2 minutes, I watched the first 2 to 3 minutes of it, and where you reference what you do, how you're a developer, how you are a contractor, and how you can,
But
you
the
do
whole
remote
point
work.
of that was saying
the whole point,
I work for
and that
people
led
to build
into
things that replace your job. Yeah.
Yes. So
I'm in
I
the
thought
business
it was good.
Of,
It was good.
Of automating people away.
Which we've talked about those things where I'm a big proponent. Well, it's interesting watching a bit back, which has your thoughts or opinions about that kind of evolved and changed because
My
of how
opinions of
regarding to like the future workforce or like how automation and something like that.
Yep.
Because you don't think computers can creatively solve problems and there always will be humans, which I do believe too. But at the same time,
well, my
and the singularity will never happen.
My perspective comes from more than just observational.
I know. But I was just curious about that because technology evolves and we evolve too in how we work with technology. So
sure,
I don't know.
I mean, it'll get more and more, but yes, I don't think we are capable of creating something that is.
You just don't believe
creative equivalent of us,
like the consciousness part. Like
no, I don't.
Machines will never have consciousness. That's
I don't believe we can.
Yeah. Which
like,
I'm not there either.
Something that is the equivalent of us.
What if it creates itself?
I don't think anything in this world has ever created itself.
Isn't there some like some type of amphibian or something like that kind of can just
Can create itself?
Oh, it can change its sex. That's what it can do. It can change its sex, and then during like
those are different things. You know that? That's biology.
Well, it could like change itself to then reproduce.
You were talking about something out of nothing.
I don't.
There was nothing. Yeah. Nah.
Well, what if I don't know? Because I guess it goes into like the whole like metaphysical aspect of consciousness. Like, what if consciousness is just a bunch of pieces put together? And what if there could be a good combination that you could eventually hit the right combination, or the computer could find the combination itself? I don't know. I know you're holding back for like talking about, which I know you want to talk about.
You're trying. You're trying. I like how you're trying to convince me, and it's like, no, I don't think so.
But I did think it was a good talk. I think people should watch it. You should watch the whole thing. Just skip past the first 2 minutes.
In like 14 seconds or something like that.
So the background about it, because like I think I remember when you did that, because I was around, was that after, I can't remember, we're around Lehigh Tech Days when you did that, and you go because you made the connection with what's her name from Lehigh University, Linda?
Oh, Lisa.
Okay, yes, Lisa from the Baker
Institute. Yep.
Baker Institute. And like, so, but what was the
last I knew she was running the Baker Institute?
Did she just like? I was curious about. Did she just ask you like, yo, you interested in doing a talk?
And what's the process? You mean? Of
well,
no, TEDx talk.
Just no, not that. Just from the topic, because we're talking about being creative, Tim. So if you like, were you faced with saying from Lisa saying, "Oh, we're looking at doing this. Would you be interested in doing a talk?" And then you came up with the idea, or was this something you had in mind that you wanted to do? As like whether or not it was TEDx or someplace, this is the type of talk you wanted to do.
No, I think she asked if I'd be interested in submitting a proposal for a talk.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
The concept of big steps in terms of innovation was already determined. Like that's what the theme of this is going to be.
So other people who were speaking was around the theme that you did too.
Should have been similar to that.
You gave your view of that within that theme.
Yeah, I mean it's general. It wasn't like we were all talking about like the future and technology and stuff like that, but it was big steps, I guess, was the idea. And that's where it led me. But yeah, then it was like, someone's asked if I would be interested in giving a talk. So at that point I was doing plenty of talks at conferences and stuff like that. So it was just the thought of, all right, if I had the 18 minutes, which I didn't use all of, right?
You used 10.
Talk.
Minus the 2.
Yeah, minus the 2.
If you minus the 2,
yeah. So what would I want to communicate? And yeah, it kind of came to me, because the story is accurate. I was sitting on a train and some of those thoughts and just wondering what the world would look like when my kids were older. So yeah.
One other thing I watched too, because I watched a few YouTube things. That's what I like to do because I pay.
Did you watch last week's episode?
YouTube Oh, of course I do, Tim.
Of course you did.
Yeah, I'm the one viewer on our YouTube channel that watches it.
There you go.
I saw this good. Have you ever seen these like those honeypot documentaries? Like these kind of tech developer documentaries. I think it's like Honeypot. It's like a YouTube channel. No. They do a pretty good job of doing it. They did a really cool documentary talking about Kubernetes, going back to
all right,
and how the evolution of that from Docker. From evolved, and Google then built, kind of took this similar ideas and built out Kubernetes. So that's something I'd highly recommend if you're curious about it, especially for someone like me who has cursory knowledge of Docker and is kind of learning it here and there. And, once I kind of do some more, like we talked about, do more production level stuff with Docker, which I think totally see the sense. I go back and forth between using it for my development setup, even though that's what the PHP ugly guys are talking about too, about their struggles with or their things with Docker, stuff like that. Which they were saying the same things you were like. Don't run PHP.
Talking about
don't run PHP locally. Well, maybe I need to find some other podcasts to listen to, Tim. Just because it pops up the day before we're going to do ours, so I'm in the mode of thinking about this stuff.
All right.
But the fact that. Now you got me off track. Now I can't even remember.
I know, right?
But it's the end of the show, so
it's the end of the show. So the one thing that I thought, got a minute left. Let's see if I can get it out.
Yeah.
Teaching people or getting people into programming. There's one thing that I've always liked, and there was an old program. It's called, I don't know what it's called actually, Robot Battle or something like that. Used VB script style, JavaScript style stuff to have you build a robot that you would then load somebody else's script, and it would see each other, try to shoot each other, grab lives and things like that. And I thought that was really cool. But just last week, I ran across a thing called BattleSnakes. And BattleSnakes is the same concept, only it's all API responses. The game asks your code, your web server, right? what to do, and you respond with what you should do. So if you're teaching the advanced web development class and you want to teach something like API integrations, this is a game.
Yeah, Tim, we could battle our snakes.
We could battle the snakes. We could build these projects, you know, for teaching people how to do API, not just going out and fetching API stuff, but actually responding to API requests. I thought it was a fascinating little thing.
That's cool.
But
I think we should at some point. Maybe we'll do a little battling.
Or you could just use it to teach your students. But
I'm not teaching computer science students anymore, Tim. I'm not doing.
No, but your advanced web dev class, no.
Well,
advanced
no,
web?
we do design. Even though I'm teaching, I am teaching them PHP, Tim. Oh. Because we're gonna do. You know what? We're gonna do the PHP include. I'm gonna show them how to do PHP templates.
This is probably a bad thing.
Yeah.
But all right, see you next week. I think what we've determined here is that if anything, you should hire Mark to make your propaganda posters.
That's a good point.